At 18, Wren Calloway had $41 a garbage bag of clothes and no one in the world who wanted her. Her mother, Rose, had died when she was 4. Her father, Griffin, disappeared 2 years later. Her Aunt Corinne took her in for 11 months, then surrendered her to the state and never came back. 7 foster homes after that. 7 bedrooms that were never hers. 7 kitchens where she learned to make herself useful because useful children got to stay a little longer. She had no family left. That's what she believed. That's what every caseworker and every foster parent had told her in that careful, pitying voice reserved for children whose histories are too sad to examine closely. Your mama's people are gone, honey. There's no one on that side. It had never occurred to Wren to question it. When you grow up in the system, you learn early that asking about your family only leads to dead ends and silence. So you stop asking. You count ceiling tiles instead. You carry what you own in a garbage bag, and you wait for the morning someone tells you it's time to leave. That morning came on a cold day in March. But what Wren didn't know yet, what she wouldn't discover until she turned a brass key in a rusted lock 200 miles south of everything she'd ever known, was that the story she had carried for 14 years was a lie. A deliberate, documented, notarized lie, filed by her own father, designed to erase her from the one person on earth who would have come for her. Her grandmother, Ida Sable, had spent 14 years searching for a granddaughter the world told her was dead. She hired investigators. She wrote letters to courts in 4 counties. She drove to Charlotte and sat in government offices waiting for someone to check records that were sealed or lost or incomplete. She did this while running a restaurant built entirely from her dead daughter's recipes, keeping the lights on and the door open because she believed that one day her granddaughter would walk through it. Ida died 8 months before Wren turned 18. She never found her, but she left behind a building, a binder full of recipes, a letter, a brass key, and a single handwritten note pinned to an empty wall that said, "This space is for Wren's pictures when she comes home." A wall left blank for photographs that didn't exist yet, of a life not yet lived, in a place Wren didn't know was hers. Before I tell you what Wren found when she opened that door, and what the letter from her dead grandmother revealed about the father who erased her, tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from right now? And has anyone ever kept a door open for you when the rest of the world had already closed theirs? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe if you're new, because this story is about to break your heart wide open and then put it back together in a way you didn't expect. The group home smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt toast. It always did. 2 years of mornings, and every single one started with that same smell, sharp enough to sting your nose, stale enough to remind you that nothing here was yours, not even the air. Wren had been awake since 5. Lying still in the narrow bed she had slept in for 2 years, listening to the younger girl stir in the room next door. A child named Destiny, who was 12, and still cried in her sleep some nights quietly, the way children cry when they've learned that nobody comes when you're loud, so you might as well be quiet about it. Wren counted ceiling tiles. She always counted them when she couldn't sleep. 14 across, 9 down. 126 tiles between her and the world that didn't want her. She had counted them so many times she could do it with her eyes closed. She knew which ones had water stains, which ones had small cracks, which one in the far corner was slightly darker than the rest, like it had been replaced years ago by someone who couldn't find an exact match and decided close enough was good enough. Close enough. That was the phrase that described her entire life. Close enough to a family. Close enough to a home. Close enough to being loved that you could almost taste it, but never quite close enough to swallow. At 7 o'clock, a staff member named Patrice knocked on her door. 2 quick knocks, the way you knock. When you've done this so many times, the motion has lost all meaning. Today's the day, Wren. You've got until noon to clear out. Wren didn't answer. She was already packed. She had been packed since yesterday, because she had learned a long time ago that the difference between the kids who survived aging out and the kids who didn't was preparation. You packed before they told you to. You planned before the plan existed. You kept your things in a bag that could be carried with one hand, because sometimes the other hand was busy opening a door you'd never walked through before. Everything she owned fit inside a black garbage bag and a backpack with a broken zipper. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, a toothbrush, a library card from the Charlotte Public System, and a cracked jade pendant on a thin silver chain. The pendant had been her mother's. She didn't remember her mother. Not really. Not the way people mean when they say remember. She didn't have scenes or conversations or the sound of a voice singing her to sleep. What she had was a feeling, something warm and low in her chest that surfaced sometimes when she smelled certain things. Cinnamon, garlic in hot oil, bread baking in a kitchen that wasn't hers. One of the older foster mothers, a woman named Mrs. Beckett, had given her the pendant when she was 10. Pulled it from a manila envelope of personal effects that had traveled through the system alongside Wren for years, moving from filing cabinet to filing cabinet, from one caseworker's desk to another, the way a child's history follows them even when the child herself has been lost. "This belonged to your mama," Mrs. Beckett had said. She was a large woman with hands that smelled like cocoa butter and a voice that never rushed. "She'd want you to have it." Mrs. Beckett was the 3rd home. She lasted 14 months, which was the longest anyone had ever kept Wren. She taught her how to make biscuits from scratch, how to fry an egg without burning the edges, how to tell when cornbread was done by the sound it made when you tapped the top. Small things, kitchen things, the kind of knowledge that passes between women through hands and heat and repetition, not through books. Then Mrs. Beckett's husband got transferred to a job in another state, and Wren went back into the system with a garbage bag and a pendant, and the memory of a kitchen where someone had once shown her without saying it out loud that food made with attention is the closest thing to love that doesn't require anyone to say the word. Wren clasped the pendant around her neck and pulled on her cleanest shirt. She checked the small envelope in her backpack's front pocket. $41. Tips she had saved from helping in the group home kitchen, peeling potatoes and washing dishes for $2 an hour under the table. She had been saving for months without knowing what she was saving for. Now she knew. She was saving for whatever came after this. She carried her things downstairs. In the front office, Patrice slid a manila folder across the desk without looking up. Birth certificate, medical records, a list of social services phone numbers printed on yellow paper that was already starting to curl at the edges. "You should call the housing line," Patrice said. "They can sometimes place people in transitional shelters." "Thank you," Wren said. Patrice looked up then. Really looked. Something moved behind her eyes. Something tired and sorry and familiar. The expression of a woman who had watched this scene play out dozens of times and knew exactly how the next 6 months would go for most of the kids who walked out that door. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a granola bar. It was the store brand. The wrapper was slightly crushed. "Take this," she said, "and Wren, be careful out there." Wren took the granola bar and put it in her backpack beside the $41 and the jade pendant and the birth certificate of a girl who had no family and no address, and no idea what the next 12 hours looked like. She walked out the front door into a March morning that couldn't decide if it was winter or spring. The air was cold, but the sun was out. The sidewalk was cracked. A city bus rumbled past without stopping. Wren stood there with her garbage bag in one hand and her backpack hanging off one shoulder and felt the full, crushing weight of being nowhere. Not homeless? Not yet. That word would come later if she let it. For now she was something worse than homeless. She was unclaimed. A girl who had aged out of the only system that had ever acknowledged her existence, standing on a sidewalk in Charlotte, North Carolina, with everything she owned. Touching her body, and nothing ahead of her, but a day she had to survive without spending more than she could afford to lose. She did not cry. She had stopped crying about things like this a long time ago. Crying was for children who still believed someone might hear them. Wren turned left and started walking. 6 blocks to the public library. It opened at 9, and she had spent more hours inside that building than anywhere else in Charlotte. The stacks were warm and quiet, and nobody asked you to leave as long as you were reading. She didn't know it yet, but she was 6 blocks and 45 minutes away from a letter that would split her life in half. A brass key, a dead woman's handwriting, and 6 words that would crack open 14 years of silence. The door is open. Come home. The Charlotte Public Library opened at 9. Wren was waiting on the bench outside at 8:30, garbage bag between her feet, backpack on her lap, watching pigeons fight over a French fry on the sidewalk. She had spent more hours inside this building than anywhere else in Charlotte. More than any group home. More than any foster kitchen. More than any classroom where teachers looked at her transcript and decided she was either a project or a lost cause, depending on how much coffee they'd had that morning. The library never decided what she was. It just let her sit. The stacks were warm and quiet. Nobody asked where you lived. Nobody asked why you were there at opening and still there at closing. Nobody looked at your garbage bag and rearranged their face into that expression, the one that was half pity and half relief, that they weren't you. Miss Alfaro was the reason. She was the head librarian, a small woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain. She had been at the front desk for as long as Wren could remember, and she had a policy that she never said out loud, but that every regular understood: if you were reading, you belonged here. That was the only membership required. When Wren came through the door that morning, Ms. Alfaro looked up from her computer. Her eyes moved from Wren's face to the garbage bag. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. She had seen Wren grow up in this building, watched her go from the children's section to the young adult shelves to the reference desks where she studied for her GED. She knew what the garbage bag meant. "Today," Miss Alfaro said. Wren nodded. "Come sit down. I have something for you." Ms. Alfaro disappeared into the back office and returned with a white envelope. She held it carefully, the way you hold something you don't fully understand, but suspect matters more than it looks. "This came yesterday," she said. "Addressed to you, care of the library. The return address is a law firm. I wasn't sure what to make of it." Wren took the envelope. The return address read, Caldwell and Associates Attorneys at Law, Millbrook, North Carolina. She had never heard of Millbrook. She didn't know anyone named Caldwell. She didn't know anyone who would send her anything through a law firm because she didn't know anyone at all. She opened it carefully, pulling out a single typed page and a small brass key taped to a piece of cardboard. The letter was dated 3 weeks earlier. "Dear Miss Calloway," it began, "my name is Martin Caldwell, and I am the executor of the estate of Ida Sable, who passed away on July 14th of last year. Mrs. Sable was your maternal grandmother." Wren stopped reading. She read that line again. Maternal grandmother. She had a grandmother. Had. The woman was dead. Had been dead for 8 months. And Wren was only finding out now in a public library with a garbage bag at her feet and $41 in her pocket. She kept reading. She left specific instructions in her will that upon your 18th birthday, you were to receive full ownership of her property at 412 Sycamore Street, Millbrook, North Carolina, known locally as Ida's Kitchen. The enclosed key opens the front door. A restaurant. A dead woman she never knew existed had left her a restaurant. At the bottom of the page, below the lawyer's signature, a separate line in different formatting. A message Ida had asked the lawyer to include. Tell her I never stopped looking. Tell her the door is open. Wren read the letter 3 times. The words didn't change, but their meaning kept shifting, rearranging itself in her mind, the way furniture moves in a dream, familiar shapes, in unfamiliar positions. She had been told her mother's family wanted nothing to do with her. That was the story, repeated by caseworkers in careful tones, passed from one foster file to the next, like a fact nobody thought to verify. Your mama's people are gone. But here was a key, and a letter, and a dead woman who shared her blood, who had apparently spent years looking for her, and the story Wren had carried since she was 4 years old cracked right down the middle, like a plate dropped on a tile floor. Maya, Ms. Alfaro's voice cut through the fog. Are you all right? I have a grandmother, Wren said. The past tense caught in her throat like a bone. I had a grandmother. Ms. Alfaro came around the desk and read the letter over Wren's shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. Millbrook, she said quietly. That's about 3 hours south, near the Uwari Forest. Small town. She left me a restaurant. She left you a home, Ms. Alfaro corrected. Wren pulled the key free from the cardboard. Old brass, slightly tarnished with a simple cut. The kind of key that opened something solid. She held it in her palm and felt its weight, small and warm, pressing against the lines of her hand, like it was trying to tell her something her skin could understand, even if her mind couldn't yet. She had $41, a garbage bag, no phone, no car, no family, and now, apparently, a building 200 miles south, with her name on the deed, and a door waiting to be opened by a key that fit in the palm of her hand. I need to get to Millbrook, she said. Ms. Alfaro drove her to the Greyhound station. She bought the ticket before Wren could object, pressing it into her hand. With both of hers, the way you pass something fragile to someone you trust to carry it. You can pay me back when you're settled, Ms. Alfaro said. Go find out what's waiting for you. The bus left Charlotte at 11:15. Wren sat by the window with her garbage bag on the seat beside her and the key in her front pocket pressing against her thigh. The city thinned and fell away. Shopping centers gave way to pine forests. The highway narrowed from 6 lanes to 4 to 2. Red clay shoulders appeared along the roadside, and farmland opened up in broad, flat stretches, broken by barns and silos and the occasional church steeple. Wren ate the granola bar and watched the world change through fingerprinted glass. Patrice's granola bar. The last thing anyone in Charlotte had given her. She didn't know what she was heading toward. A restaurant. An empty building. The ghost of a woman she had never met. It could be nothing. It could be another dead end in a life full of them. But the key was real. And the letter said her grandmother had never stopped looking. And that was more than anyone had ever offered Wren Calloway before. The bus pulled into Millbrook just after 2 in the afternoon. The stop wasn't a station, just a bench and a sign on the shoulder of the main road. Wren stepped off with her garbage bag and her backpack and stood blinking in the afternoon sun like someone who had just stepped out of a long, dark room. Millbrook was small, in a way that felt deliberate. One main street lined with brick storefronts, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign that read Loretta's, a post office, a church with a white steeple at the far end. Pickup trucks angled along the curb. A few people moved along the sidewalks without hurrying, as if the town had decided long ago that rushing was unnecessary and nobody had argued since. A woman coming out of the post office pointed her in the right direction. 2 blocks down, take a left. You can't miss it. She found it on the corner of Sycamore and Main. A single-story brick building with a wide front window and a painted sign above the door that read Ida's Kitchen in faded green letters. The building was old, but not ruined. The brickwork was clean. The glass was intact. The step in front of the door had been swept recently. Someone had been taking care of this place. For 3 years, someone had been keeping a closed restaurant alive. Wren stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building for a long time. An 18-year-old girl with $41 and a garbage bag staring at a restaurant that belonged to her, built by a woman she had never met, filled with recipes from a mother she couldn't remember. She pulled the key from her pocket. The brass was warm from her body heat. She climbed the single step, fitted the key into the lock, and turned it. The mechanism resisted, then gave way with a heavy click, the sound of something that had been waiting a long time to be opened. She pushed the door. The smell hit her first. Not dust, not mildew, not the stale air of a building left to rot. Something else entirely. Lemon oil and old wood, and underneath it all the faintest trace of cooking spices, cumin, garlic, and something sweet. She couldn't name something that bypassed her brain and went straight to a place behind her ribs that she didn't know she had. The restaurant smelled like someone had been cooking in it recently, though the letter said it had been closed for 3 years. Wren stepped inside. Late afternoon light slanted through the front window, casting long gold rectangles across the floor. The dining room was small, maybe 10 tables each, covered with a white tablecloth protected by clear plastic. Wooden chairs, mismatched but sturdy, pushed neatly into place. A long counter with 6 stools ran along the left wall, backed by a pass-through window into the kitchen. Everything was clean, not just preserved, maintained, no cobwebs, no dust on the tables. The floor had been mopped. The windows had been washed. Someone had been coming here every week for 3 years, keeping this place breathing while it waited for someone who might never come. But it was the walls that stopped Wren cold. Every wall was covered in framed photographs, dozens of them. And in photograph after photograph, the same face looked back at her. A young woman with dark hair and a wide smile, and Wren's exact jawline, Wren's exact eyes. Her mother, Rose Sable, maybe 20 years old, laughing in a kitchen with flour on her nose. Rose standing in front of this very building on what must have been opening day, a banner behind her reading, "Grand Opening." Rose stirring something in a massive pot, looking over her shoulder at the camera, with a grin that said she knew exactly how good it was going to taste. Rose, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Wren recognized the blanket. She had seen it once in a caseworker's file, a blurry photograph papered to the inside of a manila folder. That baby was her. Her legs went soft. She grabbed the edge of the counter and held on the way you hold on to something when the floor beneath you has just shifted, and you're not sure it's going to stop. Her mother was everywhere in this room. Every wall, every surface, every corner. Ida had turned this restaurant into a shrine of Rose's life, a place where her daughter would never be forgotten, where anyone who walked through the door would know who Rose Sable was, and that she had been loved completely fiercely and without condition. Wren moved along the wall, slowly studying each photograph, the way surgeons study scans looking for what's there and what's missing. Rose as a teenager, sitting on a porch railing with a guitar. Rose in a graduation cap. Rose in this kitchen covered in flour, laughing at something the camera couldn't hear. Rose holding baby Wren on her hip, both of them squinting into the sun. Her mother's arm wrapped tight around her. The kind of hold that says, "I've got you," and means it all the way down. Then the photographs stopped, and a clean stretch of wall began. There, pinned to a small corkboard, was a single handwritten note on yellow paper. The handwriting was shaky, but careful. Every letter formed with the kind of deliberate attention that says the hand is tired, but the heart is not. This wall is for Wren's pictures when she comes home. Wren's breath left her body, an empty wall, waiting for photographs that didn't exist yet, of a life she hadn't lived yet, in a place she didn't know was hers. Ida had left a literal physical space on the wall of this restaurant reserved for a granddaughter the world had told her was dead.
Not a hope, not a prayer, a space with a note, dated and pinned and left in place as if Ida knew, with the certainty that only grandmothers have, that one day someone would stand exactly where Wren was standing now and read those words and understand what they meant. Wren pressed her palm flat against the empty wall. The plaster was cool under her fingers. She could feel the texture of it, the slight roughness, the tiny imperfections. A wall that it had been waiting for her for 18 years.
She stayed like that for a long time, hand against the wall, forehead against her hand, eyes closed, standing in a dead woman's restaurant surrounded by photographs of a mother she couldn't remember, touching a space that had been kept blank for her by someone who refused to believe she was gone. When she finally opened her eyes, she noticed something she had missed. On the counter beside an old cash register sat a sealed envelope, cream-colored thick, the kind meant for important documents. Across the front, in careful cursive, "For Wren when she comes home." Inside, she could feel something stiff behind the paper. She ran her thumb under the seal. The envelope opened. A folded letter, several pages long. And tucked behind it, a photograph she had never seen. A woman in her 60s, silver-haired and thin-faced, standing in the doorway of this restaurant with her arms open wide. On the back, in pencil, Ida Sable, 2019. Waiting. Arms open. Standing in the doorway. Waiting for a granddaughter who was 200 miles away, counting ceiling tiles in a group home, believing she was unwanted, not knowing that a woman who shared her blood had spent 14 years with her arms open and the door unlocked. Wren held the photograph against her chest and sat down on the nearest stool. The restaurant was silent around her. Late sun poured through the window. Her mother watched from every wall. She unfolded the first page of the letter. "My dearest Wren," it began, "if you are reading this, then you found your way here, just like I always believed you would." The letter was 6 pages long, written on both sides in Ida's careful hand. The ink had slight tremors in the longer strokes, the marks of a hand that was growing tired, but refused to stop before the words were finished. Wren read it slowly, the way she used to read books that mattered too much to rush. "My dearest Wren, if you are reading this, then you found your way here just like I always believed you would. I want you to know something before you read another word. You were wanted. You were loved every single day of your life, even the days you didn't know I existed." Wren's hands were shaking. She set the letter flat on the counter and pressed her palms against the edges to hold it still. Ida wrote about Rose, about the little girl who used to stand on a step stool in the kitchen and stir whatever was on the stove, whether it needed stirring or not. About the teenager who played guitar on the back porch and sang too loud, and burned every batch of cookies she attempted, until one afternoon at 16, something clicked, and she started cooking with the kind of confidence that made grown women step aside and watch. Rose's food was her language. Ida wrote. She could say things with a pot of soup that she couldn't say with words. She never measured anything. She cooked the way some people sing by ear, by feel, by something that can't be taught, only recognized. Then the letter changed. The handwriting stayed steady, but the words got heavier. When your mother died, I thought the world had ended. She was 28 years old. She was my only child. And I was told that you died with her. Wren stopped breathing. Your father called me the day after the accident and said neither of you had survived. I believed him because I had no reason not to. I buried my daughter, and I grieved for you both. Griffin Calloway had picked up a phone, called a woman who had just lost her only daughter, and told her that her granddaughter was dead too. Then he left Wren with his sister and disappeared. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had erased her. But something never sat right with me, Ida continued. There was no funeral for you. No death certificate I could find in the county records. No grave beside your mother's. When I asked your father for details, the phone number was disconnected. I started asking questions and nobody had answers. That's when I began to wonder. What happened next filled 3 pages. Ida hired a private investigator named Ray Dunning out of Raleigh. $400 a month. She wrote letters to Child Protective Services in 3 counties. She drove to Charlotte and sat in government offices waiting for someone to check records that were sealed or lost or incomplete. She filed requests with family courts in 4 counties, all denied or unanswered. She did this for 14 years. I never found you, Ida wrote, but I never stopped looking, and I never believed you were dead. A grandmother knows. I can't explain it any better than that. I knew you were out there, and I knew that one day you would need a place to come home to, so I built one. The letter explained the restaurant. After Rose died, Ida took her daughter's recipes, the ones scribbled on napkins and the backs of grocery lists and scraps of paper shoved into kitchen drawers, and she opened a restaurant with them. Every dish on the menu was something Rose had made. The cornbread, the pot roast, the black-eyed peas. The peach cobbler people drove 30 miles for. All Rose's, Ida wrote. This restaurant is your mother's legacy, and now it's yours. Everything in it belongs to you. The building, the equipment, the recipes, and the love that went into every wall and every plate. The letter told Wren about Eugene next door, who would explain the practical things, about money set aside to keep the lights on. Then this. The important thing is this. You are not alone. You never were. Even when they told you there was nobody, I was here. Looking for you. Cooking your mother's food. Keeping the door open, waiting. The last lines were the ones that broke her. I'm sorry I ran out of time. I spent 14 years reaching for you, and I died 8 months short. I will never forgive the universe for that, and I hope you won't either. Be angry about it. You've earned that. But the door is open. It will always be open. Come home. Your grandmother, Ida. Wren set the letter down on her lap. She didn't fold it. She didn't move. She sat on the stool in the silent restaurant, with late afternoon light turning the floor to gold, and photographs of her mother watching from every wall, and she cried the way she hadn't cried since she was a child. Not quietly, not with the discipline she'd learned in group homes where noise meant attention, and attention was never good. She cried with her whole body, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep you didn't know it was there until something finally reached it. She cried for Ida, who spent 14 years reaching for a granddaughter and died 8 months too soon. She cried for Rose, the mother she couldn't remember, whose recipes filled a binder in the kitchen. She cried for the girl who had counted ceiling tiles and carried a garbage bag through 7 homes and believed every single day that she was unwanted. And she cried for the 14 years. The years she was 200 miles away, sleeping in beds that weren't hers, while a woman in this town spent every spare dollar trying to find her. 7 foster homes, 7 kitchens, 7 times she packed a garbage bag and walked out a door. And the whole time there was a grandmother who wanted her, a restaurant with her name on the wall, a door waiting to be opened. The whole time. The crying lasted until the light through the window shifted from gold to amber. Then Wren wiped her face with the back of her hand. She picked up the photograph of Ida, the silver-haired woman standing in the doorway with her arms open wide, and held it beside the nearest photograph of Rose on the wall. 2 women she had never known. Grandmother and mother. One who cooked by instinct, and one who translated that instinct into something the world could taste. Both gone. Both leaving her everything they had. Wren set Ida's photograph on the counter propped against the register facing the empty wall where her pictures would go. "I'm here," she said to the quiet room. "I'm sorry it took so long." Then she stood up, pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen, and went to find the recipe binder. A knock at the front door made Wren jump. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and walked through the dining room. Through the glass, she could see a man on the step. He was old. Late 70s, maybe older. Full head of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from hardwood and left out in the weather for 50 years. He wore a canvas jacket and heavy boots and stood with the slightly bow-legged stance of someone who had spent a lifetime on his feet doing work that never asked permission to break him down. His eyes were deep-set and dark, and when they found Wren's face through the glass, something happened in them that she couldn't name. Not surprise. He had been expecting her. Something closer to relief. The look of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years and had just been given permission to exhale. She opened the door. "You look like her," he said quietly. His voice was rough, the kind that came from decades of not talking much and meaning every word when he did. "You look just like Rose." "Who are you?" "Eugene Oakes. I own the hardware store next door." He paused. "Well, owned it. Retired now. But I've been keeping an eye on this place." His gaze moved past her into the restaurant, scanning the dining room the way a man checks on a house he's been watching over, looking for anything that had shifted since his last visit. Then his eyes came back to her face. "Ida told me you'd come. I promised her I'd be here when you did." Wren stepped aside. Eugene moved through the dining room with the familiarity of someone who had walked this floor 1,000 times. He didn't touch anything, but his eyes lingered on the photographs on the covered tables on the counter where Ida's letter still lay unfolded. "You read the letter," he said, "not a question." "Yes." He lowered himself onto the third stool from the left, the way a man sits down in his own kitchen, in a spot worn to the shape of him by years of showing up. "Then you know the bones of it." "She looked for me. For 14 years, Wren said. 14 years, Eugene repeated like he was still counting, like the number hadn't stopped growing just because Ida had. He explained the practical things. Ida had set aside money in a separate account before she got sick. Enough for electric, water, and basic maintenance for 5 years. Eugene had managed it. He came every week, checked the locks, ran the water so the pipes wouldn't seize, mopped the floors, wiped the photographs, kept the cooler humming. 3 years, every single week. A man in his late 70s driving to an empty restaurant mopping a floor. Nobody walked on cleaning windows. Nobody looked through maintaining a building for someone who might never come. "Why?" Wren asked. The question was simple. The answer was simpler. "Because I promised her," Eugene said, "and because this place matters. It mattered to Ida, and it mattered to this town. When she closed the doors, it felt like someone turned the lights off on the whole street. He looked at the kitchen pass through. She made food that made people feel like they belonged somewhere. That's a rare thing. Most people go their whole lives without finding a place that does that. Ida built one. Wren didn't know what to say. She stood behind the counter with her garbage bag at her feet and her $41 in her pocket and tried to make sense of what was happening. 24 hours ago, she was counting ceiling tiles. Now she was standing in a restaurant that belonged to her talking to an old man who had kept a promise to a dead woman for 3 years because he said he would, and that was enough. "Are you hungry?" Eugene asked. The question cut through everything, simple and direct, and human in a way nothing else that day had been. "When did you last eat?" he pressed. Wren thought about the granola bar on the bus. "This morning, sort of." Eugene stood up. "Kitchen works. Gas is on. Water's on. There should be dry goods in the pantry." Ida kept the staples stocked. He moved toward the door. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. I have some things at my place." He left before Wren could object. She stood alone in the restaurant. The silence settled around her like a blanket, heavy, but not cold. Then she walked into the kitchen, opened the pantry, and looked. Cornmeal and flour in airtight containers. Canned goods. Salt, pepper, sugar, baking soda. Basic things, but enough. She pulled the recipe binder to the prep counter and opened it to the cornbread page. 2 handwritings. The first was loose and confident with notes in the margins, "Needs more salt," and "Double the garlic. Trust me." Rose's hand. A woman who cooked by instinct and wrote instructions the way poets write just enough words to point at the truth without explaining it. The second was Ida's careful cursive filling in what Rose had left out. Precise measurements, exact temperatures, and occasional notes that said things like, "Rose never measured this. I watched her make it 40 times before I got it right." 2 women's voices on one page. A daughter who cooked by feel, and a mother who spent years translating that feel into something anyone could follow. A conversation between the living and the dead, written in flour and buttermilk, and the exact temperature of a cast-iron skillet. Wren found the skillet on a rack above the stove. She measured cornmeal, cracked an egg, poured buttermilk. Her hands remembered motions her mind had almost forgotten. Mrs. Beckett, the foster mother who had lasted 14 months, showing her how to tell when cornbread was done by the sound it made when you tapped the top. She slid the skillet into the oven, set a timer for 20 minutes. The smell reached the dining room within 5. By 10 minutes, it had filled the entire building. Warm and golden, equal parts grain and butter, and something harder to name. The smell of food made by someone who cared whether you ate. Eugene came back carrying a paper bag. He set it on the counter without a word. Inside, 2 jars of homemade blackberry jam, a tub of butter, and a carton of sweet tea. He sat down at the counter, 3rd stool from the left, and waited. The timer went off. Wren pulled the cornbread from the oven. Golden on top. Slightly dark around the edges, where the batter had hit the screaming hot iron. She cut it into wedges, set one on a plate, and slid it across the counter. Eugene didn't speak. He broke the wedge in half, spread butter on one piece, took a bite. Then he closed his eyes and sat very still. The restaurant was quiet. The late sun had shifted to amber. Photographs of Rose watched from every wall. And a man who had eaten in this kitchen 1,000 times was tasting something he thought he would never taste again. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. "That's her," he said. "That's Ida." He didn't mean the recipe was identical. He didn't mean the cornbread was a perfect copy. He meant something deeper than that. He meant that whatever passed from Rose to Ida to the pages of that binder had just passed one more time to a girl who had learned to cook in stolen minutes in other people's kitchens, and it had survived the journey. Wren ate standing up, leaning against the prep counter the way she had eaten in every kitchen she had ever worked in. The cornbread was good. Better than good. It tasted like something she had forgotten she knew. They ate in silence until the pan was empty. Then Eugene wiped his hands and stood up slowly. "There's an office through the door behind the kitchen," he said. "Ida spent a lot of time in there, especially toward the end. You should see it." He stopped in the doorway and looked back. "Home isn't where they keep you, Wren. It's where someone kept a place for you." He nodded once and left. The office was small. A desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf, a single window looking out on the back alley. The desk was covered in papers, neatly organized into stacks secured with rubber bands. The room smelled like old paper and coffee, as if Ida had just stepped out and would be back any minute. Wren sat down in her grandmother's chair. The seat was worn to the shape of someone else's body. She could feel the impression of the woman who had sat here for years, writing letters, making phone calls, searching for a granddaughter the world said was dead. She opened the filing cabinet. The top drawer held what she expected: tax records, business documents, supplier invoices from farms and wholesale companies, the ordinary bones of a small restaurant. The second drawer stopped her cold. Manila folders, thick ones, organized by year. The earliest was dated 14 years ago, just months after Rose's death. Wren pulled it out and opened it. The first page was a private investigator's summary. Clinical language. No emotion. Subject claims granddaughter may be alive despite reported death. Initial inquiry shows no death certificate filed in county of accident. Recommend further investigation. She opened the next folder, and the next, and the next. 14 years of paper. Dead ends and false leads. Letters Ida had written to the Department of Social Services, each one more urgent than the last. Form letters that came back saying her inquiry had been noted and would be processed. Copies of requests filed with family courts in 4 counties. All denied or unanswered. Invoices from Ray Dunning, the private investigator. $400 a month. Month after month after month. For years. From a woman who ran a small restaurant in a small town and probably had to choose some months between paying the investigator and paying herself. She chose the investigator. Every time. Wren turned the pages slowly. She could see the progression. The early letters were polite, formal, hopeful. A grandmother making a reasonable request. By year 3, the tone had sharpened. By year 7, Ida was writing to state legislators. By year 10, the letters read like someone who had been screaming into a pillow for a decade and was running out of air but refusing to stop. And nobody listened. Nobody came. Nobody checked. A girl was alive in foster care 200 miles away, and a grandmother was spending every spare dollar trying to find her, and the system that held them both treated them like files in separate cabinets that would never be cross-referenced. Then Wren reached the bottom of the last folder. A single sheet of paper. A photocopy, partially faded. She almost missed it between 2 invoices. She pulled it out and read it, and the room tilted. A death certificate. Name Wren Calloway. Date of death, the same day as Rose's accident. Cause of death, motor vehicle collision. Filed by Griffin Calloway. Her father. Wren stared at her own name on a document that said she was dead. Her own birthday. Her own cause of death. Filed by the man who had left her with his sister. And vanished. But not before making one phone call and signing one piece of paper that would erase her from the only person who would have come for her. He had killed her on paper, cleanly, officially. The kind of death that shows up in databases and closes cases and makes investigators stop looking because the girl is dead. The file is shut. There is nothing more to find. And Ida had found this document, had held it in her hands in this very chair, had read her granddaughter's name beside the word deceased, and known with the certainty that only comes from love, that refuses to accept evidence that it was a lie. Every investigator who searched for Wren would have found this certificate and stopped. Case closed. The girl is dead. Move on. Ida didn't move on. She looked up at the corkboard above the desk. Photographs pinned to it, blurry and distant. A grainy yearbook photo. A small girl standing in line at what looked like a food bank. A slightly older girl sitting on a bench outside a public library. Her. All of them were her. Ida had found these scraps somewhere in the vast, indifferent machinery of the system and collected them and pinned them to her wall. Proof, not legal proof, not the kind that opens sealed records or overturns death certificates. The grandmother kind. The kind that says, I see you even from here, even through the blur, even when nobody else is looking. Wren unpinned the library photo and held it close. She recognized the bench. She recognized the jacket she was wearing. She was maybe 14 in that picture, sitting outside the Charlotte Public Library with a book on her lap, completely unaware that 200 miles south a woman had found this image and pinned it to a corkboard and looked at it every single day. She put the photo back, carefully, exactly where it had been. Then she looked at the death certificate one more time. She didn't need to read it again. The words were already carved into her, but she needed to understand the full shape of what her father had done. He didn't just leave. Leaving was the smallest thing. He called Ida, told her Wren was dead, filed the paperwork to make it official, and then handed his living daughter to his sister, who kept her for 11 months, knew the death certificate was a lie, and never once picked up the phone to call the grandmother who was already searching. Corinne knew. She knew, and she said nothing. And Wren grew up in 7 homes believing she was unwanted, while a woman 200 miles away was writing letters to courts that never answered, and paying investigators who kept finding a death certificate with her granddaughter's name on it. Wren set the document face down on the desk. She pressed the edges flat with both hands, the way you press a wound closed before the bleeding gets worse. Then she put her head down on the desk on top of 14 years of paper and closed her eyes. She didn't cry this time. She was past crying. What she felt was deeper than tears. It was the feeling of the ground shifting beneath everything she had ever believed about herself, every story she had carried, every assumption she had made about why she was alone. She wasn't unwanted. She was stolen. Wren didn't sleep that night. She sat at Ida's desk until the light through the office window turned amber, then gray, then nothing at all. The death certificate lay face down on the desk, where she'd placed it an hour ago, its edges curling slightly under the weight of her palm before she pulled away. She couldn't look at it again. She didn't need to. The words had already carved themselves into her, the neat typed lines, the official seal, her own name, beside a date of death that never happened, and at the bottom, in a signature she didn't recognize, but knew belonged to the man who was supposed to keep her safe, Griffin Calloway. Her father had killed her on paper, filed the forms, made the lie official, then handed her to Corinne like luggage he no longer wanted to carry, and walked out the door. Sometime after midnight, Wren moved to the dining room. She didn't turn on the lights. She pulled a chair from the nearest table, sat down, drew her knees to her chest, and looked at the photographs on the walls. Street light came through the front windows in pale rectangles that slid across the floor as cars passed on Sycamore 1 every 10 or 15 minutes, headlights sweeping the room and lighting Rose's face in frame after frame. Her mother smiled in every photograph, stirring something in a pot, standing on the front steps with her arms crossed and her head tilted, holding a baby in a yellow blanket, looking down with an expression Wren had never seen directed at herself by anyone in any room in 18 years. The quiet was total. No group home sounds, no footsteps in the hallway, no television bleeding through thin walls, no. Patrice knocking at 7 to tell her the clock was running. Just the building settling into its bones and the distant sound of a train she couldn't see. She thought about Griffin Calloway. She had hated him for leaving. That was the old wound, the simple one, a father who drove away when she was 6 and never came back. She'd carried that wound so long it had become furniture, something she arranged her life around without examining. But the wound she'd found today was different, deeper, shaped like a phone call. He had called Ida. He had said the baby didn't make it either. He had listened to a grandmother's grief on the other end of the line and let her believe it. Then he had gone to the county office and signed a piece of paper that made sure anyone who came looking would find a dead end instead of a living child. And Corinne knew. Her aunt, who kept her for 11 months and fed her cereal for dinner, and sometimes forgot to pick her up from the bus stop, Corinne had known the lie existed and never corrected it. Never picked up a phone and called the woman 200 miles south, who was spending every dollar she had trying to find a girl the system said was buried. 14 years in foster care, 7 homes, 3 group homes, a garbage bag for a suitcase, and the whole time 200 miles away, a woman sat at this desk writing letters no one answered. Wren cried in the dark, quietly, the way she'd learned in group homes where noise meant attention, and attention was never good. She pressed her face into her knees and let her shoulders shake without sound, a skill she wished she'd never had to learn. She cried until there was nothing left, and then she sat in the emptiness and breathed. Dawn came slowly. The dining room filled with gray light, then blue, then the first gold edge of sun across the floor. Rose's photographs emerged from shadow one by one, as if the room were remembering them. At 7 o'clock, Eugene opened the front door with his own key. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee and a small brown bag. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask how she slept. He set the cups on the counter and said, "Black coffee. Don't know how you take it. Sugar's in the bag." Wren came out of the dining room. Her eyes were swollen. Her voice was flat. "He told her I was dead." "I know." Eugene sat on the second stool from the left. He opened the brown bag, 2 biscuits wrapped in wax paper, and placed one in front of the empty stool beside him. An invitation without pressure. Wren sat. She held the coffee with both hands and let the heat move through her fingers. "Tell me about her," she said. "Tell me about Ida." Eugene took a sip, set the cup down, looked at the photographs on the far wall as if asking permission. "Stubbornest woman I ever met," he said. One Tuesday morning she showed up at my shop with a file box. Detective reports letters she'd written to the state petitions she'd filed with the court. Set it on my counter and said, "Eugene, I have evidence my granddaughter is alive and nobody will listen." "Did you believe her?" Eugene turned to Wren. His eyes were steady, the kind of steady that comes from years of meaning exactly what you say. "Ida Sable didn't lie and didn't chase ghosts. If she said you were alive, I believed her." The journal was in the 3rd drawer of the filing cabinet, beneath a stack of supplier invoices Ida would never pay. Black leather cover, soft at the edges, from years of handling a faded ribbon marking a page near the end. Wren opened it to the first page. The date was 14 years ago. The handwriting was neat, upright, certain. Started looking for Wren today. Called Ray, asked him to search foster care records in Mecklenburg County. He said it could take months. I told him I have years. She turned pages slowly. The journal wasn't organized by theme. It moved between the restaurant and the search the way Ida's life must have moved between them, one bleeding into the other, without separation. Peach cobbler recipe, finally right. Rose would have added cinnamon. She was always wrong about cinnamon. Then, 2 pages later, Ray called. No records in Mecklenburg. Trying Cabarrus next. Then a woman came in today with her granddaughter. Little girl sat at the counter eating cornbread with jam. I went into the kitchen and cried for 10 minutes. The entries kept this rhythm for years. A recipe adjusted. A lead gone cold. A child in the restaurant who wasn't Wren. A letter sent to social services returned with a form reply. Ida wrote about all of it in the same steady hand, as if documenting the search and documenting the soup were equally necessary acts of faith. Wrote to DSS again. 3rd letter this year. Same response. Your inquiry has been noted. Ray found a school enrollment record, first name Wren, age matches. Charlotte, Mecklenburg District. No photo, no last name released. But it's her. I know it's her. Called the school. They can't confirm or deny. Called the district office. Same answer. Called a lawyer. He said without custody or a court order, I have no standing. I said I'm her grandmother. He said the system doesn't know that. Wren read without skipping. She owed Ida that much. The entries from the last 2 years were different. The handwriting loosened, trembled at the ends of words. The ink changed thicker pens, easier to grip. 6 months to a year, the doctor says. I told him I need 2. Can't stand at the stove more than 20 minutes. Eugene comes to help. He burns everything, but he tries. Closed the restaurant today. Couldn't keep it open alone, and couldn't ask anyone else to carry it. Hardest thing I've done since burying Rose. Gave Eugene the key. Told him to check the locks. Run the water. Keep it standing. He asked how long. I said until she comes. Then the entry Wren had been moving toward without knowing it dated 10 months before Ida died. The handwriting was uneven. Some words pressed hard into the page. Others barely touched. I'm not going to find her. I know that now. I've spent 14 years and more money than I should have, and written more letters than I can count. And I am not going to find my granddaughter before I die. But I will not stop believing she's alive. And I will not close that door. Eugene will keep the place standing. Recipes are in the binder. Photos on the walls. If she comes in 10 years or 20, it will be waiting. Martin has the will. The key. The letter. I just wish I were the one handing it to her. Wren closed the journal. She pressed it against her chest with both arms. The way you hold something that might break if you let go. She put her head down on the desk. She didn't cry quietly this time. The sound came from somewhere below her ribs, raw, graceless, the kind of crying she hadn't allowed herself in years. It filled the small office and pushed against the walls, and she let it. Eugene appeared in the doorway. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He pulled the second chair from the corner and sat beside her close enough that she could feel the weight of him there, and he waited. When the crying slowed, he said, "She wrote about you. Every week for 14 years. I know, Wren said. She read them to you sometimes. She did. Wren lifted her head. Her face was wrecked and she didn't care. I want to reopen it, she said. The restaurant. I want to reopen it. Eugene looked at her for a long time. Then, the first smile Wren had seen from him, small, quiet, earned. Ida said you'd be stubborn. She said, if that girl's anything like her mother, she'll walk in and start cooking before the door swings shut. Will you help me? I promised Ida I'd be here when you came. I didn't put a time limit on that promise. Loretta came first. She crossed the street from her diner at 8 the next morning, carrying a cardboard box with both hands. Soup in a mason jar, rice in a container, bread wrapped in cloth apples, potatoes, a bottle of dish soap, and a stack of kitchen towels folded tight with a note tucked inside. Ida would be proud. Welcome home. She set the box on the counter and looked around the dining room the way someone looks at a house where a friend used to live. Then she looked at Wren. This town cared about Ida, and they'll care about you. Give them the chance. Wren didn't know what to say to that, so she said thank you and started unpacking the box. Eugene arrived an hour later. He wasn't alone. 2 men from the church followed him in work boots and canvas jackets, carrying toolboxes and a stepladder. They nodded at Wren the way men nod when they've been told what needs doing and intend to do it without conversation. By noon, the front door swung smooth on new hinges. 2 ceiling tiles that had sagged with water damage came down and went up replaced. Eugene scraped the old paint from the sign out front, while one of the church men sanded the edges. By 3 o'clock, fresh green letters spelled IDA's Kitchen against the wood, the same shade as the original Eugene had kept the paint code in a notebook in his shop. Bet drove up in a truck that smelled like hay and engine oil. She was wide, sun-darkened direct. She carried a crate of eggs in one arm and a gallon of milk in the other. Ida bought my eggs every week for 15 years. I've got more than I can sell. I'll bring them Tuesdays. She set the crate on the counter and left before Wren could answer. By the second day, the list had grown. The front door opened and closed without sticking. The ceiling was patched. The sign was painted. Someone Wren never found out who left a clay pot with a fern beside the front step. The refrigerator, that had stood empty for 3 years, now held eggs, milk butter, and apples. A woman Wren had never met dropped off a bag of yellow onions and 6 cans of black-eyed peas. For the soup, she said, as if Wren would know which soup. Wren looked at the binder and found it Ida's black-eyed pea soup, the recipe written in Rose's hand on the back of a grocery list. The woman was right. The churchmen came back on the second afternoon and replaced the weather stripping on the back door. One of them adjusted the pilot light on the old stove, tested every burner, and said, "She runs fine." Ida kept her tuned. He patted the stove like it was something living. Wren stood in the middle of the dining room on the second evening and tried to understand what was happening. She'd been in this town 3 days. She hadn't asked anyone for anything. And strangers had brought food, fixed what was broken, and treated this building as if its reopening was personally important to each of them. She said this to Eugene, who was sweeping the front step, a task no one had assigned him, and no one needed to. He leaned on the broom and looked at her as if she'd asked why water runs downhill. Ida fed this town for 17 years. Sunday dinners for people who ate alone. Soup for anyone who showed up hungry, whether they could pay or not. Thanksgiving plates delivered to every house on Sycamore. She fed this town Wren. You think they forgot? He went back to sweeping. Wren looked at the dining room. The clean tables, the patched ceiling, the photographs on the walls, the refrigerator humming with food she hadn't bought. She looked at the green sign through the front window, still tacky with fresh paint. She'd spent 18 years believing she had no one. That the world was a place where you carried your own bags and opened your own doors and didn't expect anyone to show up, because no one ever did. She was starting to think Ida had lived in a different world, and maybe that world was still here waiting for someone to walk back into it. Wren kept the phone number on the back of a napkin for 2 days before she used it. Martin Caldwell had included it in the estate file, Corinne Calloway's number written in the lawyer's careful hand beneath a note, next of kin, paternal side. Contacted during probate. Responsive. That single word sat heavy. Responsive. Corinne had answered when a lawyer called about property. She had not answered when a grandmother called about a child. Wren made the call at dusk, sitting on the concrete step in front of the restaurant. The street was quiet. Loretta's lights were on across the road. A dog barked somewhere behind the church. 3 rings. Hello. Corinne. Silence. Not the silence of someone trying to place a voice. The silence of someone who already has. Wren, how did you know? Because nobody else would call me and sound like that. Wren gripped the phone. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in the office in the dark, while scrubbing the stove that didn't need scrubbing. Every rehearsal had been different. In some, she was cold and precise. In some, she screamed. In one, she simply hung up without saying anything at all. Now the moment was here, and she couldn't find any of the scripts she'd written. I've been waiting for this call, Corinne said. Didn't know when, but I knew it had come. I need you to come here. I need you to tell me why. Corinne said she'd drive down the next morning. She arrived 4 hours early. She was smaller than Wren expected. Late 40s, but wearing it hard, thin, short gray hair cut close lines around her mouth that came from pressing her lips together for years. She stood in the doorway of Ida's kitchen and didn't step inside until Wren moved to the side, which Wren understood was not politeness, but the behavior of someone who knew she hadn't earned the right to walk in freely. Corinne moved through the dining room slowly. Her eyes went to the photographs, rows at 20 rows in the kitchen, rows on the front steps. She stopped in front of the picture of Rose holding baby Wren in the yellow blanket. Your mother loved you more than anything in the world. Wren had prepared to feel rage. She had expected it to come surging up the moment Corinne opened her mouth, hot, justified 18 years' worth. But the feeling that arrived was quieter. She was tired, and she was looking at a woman who had been punishing herself longer and more thoroughly than Wren ever could. They sat at the counter, 2 stools apart. When Griffin left you with me, Corinne said, I was falling apart, husband gone, behind on rent, drinking more than I should have been. He said a few weeks just until he got set up somewhere. He didn't come back. And you couldn't keep me. I couldn't keep myself. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that the state would find you a real family, somebody stable. I told myself a lot of things. When did you find out he called Ida? That he told her I was dead? Corinne's head dropped. She looked at her hands on the counter. About a year after. Someone mentioned it. By then you were already in the system. I told myself it was too late, the lie was done, and undoing it wouldn't help anyone. You knew Ida was looking for me. I heard things. Through people. And you didn't call her. No. One phone call, Corinne. You pick up the phone, you say 4 words, your granddaughter is alive, and I don't spend 14 years in foster care. Corinne didn't argue. She didn't defend. She sat with it the way someone sits with a weight they've been carrying so long, their spine has curved around it. I wasn't strong enough to keep you, and I wasn't brave enough to tell the truth. Those are 2 different kinds of wrong, but they're both mine. The dining room was quiet. Light moved across the floor. Rose smiled from the walls. Wren didn't forgive her. The word was too large, too final, and she wasn't sure she had the right to use it yet, not on behalf of the 4-year-old who'd needed someone, not on behalf of the 14 years that someone could have shortened with a single call. But she didn't tell Corinne to leave. Are you hungry? Wren asked. Corinne looked up. Her eyes were red and confused. What? I'm going to cook. You can stay if you want. They stood side by side in the kitchen. Corinne peeled carrots. Wren chopped onions. The only sounds were the knife on the cutting board and the pot coming to a boil. Neither of them tried to fill the silence with words that wouldn't fit. After a while, Corinne said, Your mother used to hum when she cooked. Same 3 songs, church hymns. Couldn't hit a note to save her life, but she hummed loud enough to hear from the porch. Wren's hands stopped on the cutting board. Then they started again. She didn't hum, but she didn't ask Corinne to stop talking either. Eugene came in at 6 with Loretta behind him carrying a pie plate covered in foil. They stopped in the doorway when they saw Wren and Corinne standing 3 feet apart at the stove, cooking in a silence that wasn't comfortable, but wasn't hostile either. The careful quiet of 2 people who had decided, without discussing it, to see what the next hour felt like before deciding anything else. Loretta read the situation in about 2 seconds. She'd been reading situations across a counter for 40 years, and she didn't need anyone to explain this one. Smells like Ida's soup, she said. She set the pie on the counter and reached for 4 bowls off the shelf without asking. Anybody hungry? Eugene took the 3rd stool from the left. Corinne hesitated by the pass-through, holding a dish towel she'd been drying her hands on for longer than her hands needed drying, and Wren said, Sit down, Corinne. There's enough. So Corinne sat 1 stool away from Eugene, close enough to be part of the row, and far enough to leave him his space. Wren ladled the soup. Black-eyed peas, onions, a ham bone Betty had brought over that morning wrapped in butcher paper. She cut the cornbread into thick wedges and set the butter in the middle of the counter where anyone could reach it. Loretta poured sweet tea into 4 glasses from the pitcher in the fridge. Nobody made a speech. Nobody offered a toast. They ate. Eugene finished his first bowl and pushed it forward for another without comment, which was the highest compliment Eugene Oakes was capable of giving. Loretta ate slower, watching Corinne between spoonfuls in the way she watched everyone the first time they came into her diner, not unfriendly, just measuring. Corinne ate with her head down the way someone eats when they're trying not to cry into the bowl. Wren watched all of it and felt something she didn't have a word for. 4 people at a counter. None of them belonged to each other by blood in any way that mattered. But they were here, eating food she had cooked in a room her grandmother had built from recipes her mother had written on the backs of grocery lists 18 years ago. Loretta cut the pie, sweet potato still warm. Ida's recipe, Wren asked. Mine, Loretta said. But Ida taught me how to get the crust right, so I guess it's half hers. They ate the pie. Eugene had 2 slices. Corinne had 1, and then sat very still looking at her empty plate, as if she were reading something written on it. I'd like to come back tomorrow, she said quietly, for the opening, if that's all right. Wren looked at the woman who had failed her in every way that mattered, standing well, sitting on a stool in her grandmother's restaurant, asking permission to be present, not asking to be forgiven, not asking to be family, just asking to be there. Ida had spent 20 years keeping a door open. Wren was starting to understand why. 11 o'clock, she said. She was awake at 5. She stood in the kitchen in the dark for a minute before turning the lights on, listening to the building. It was quiet, the way old buildings are quiet, not silent, but settled the small creaks and hums of pipes and wood that had been keeping their own time for 60 years. She turned on the ovens. She pulled the cornbread pans off the rack. She measured cornmeal buttermilk eggs. Her hands moved without needing to be told. Somewhere between yesterday and this morning, the recipes had stopped being instructions and started being memory. By 6:30, 3 cast-iron skillets of cornbread were cooling on the counter. A pot of black-eyed pea soup was simmering low. pot roast was in the oven. Rose's recipe, the one written on the back of an envelope from the power company, dated the year Wren was born. Eugene came in at 7:30. He didn't knock. He walked to the third stool from the left and sat down. Wren set a cup of coffee in front of him without asking how he took it. She already knew. Loretta came at 9 with a stack of white tablecloths, freshly ironed, still warm. She and Wren covered the tables together, not speaking, working from opposite ends, and meeting in the middle. Corinne arrived at 10:30. She had changed her shirt. She had put on lipstick. It was the small, careful effort of a woman who wasn't sure she was welcome and wanted to at least look like she had tried. She stopped just inside the door, and Wren looked at her and pointed to the kitchen. "Apron's on the hook. You can plate." Corinne's face did something complicated. She nodded and went. At 10 to 11, Wren stood behind the counter and looked at the room. The tables were set. The photographs on the walls caught the morning light. Her mother smiled from every direction. The empty wall was still empty, but not for much longer. At 11 o'clock, Wren walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and unlocked it. An older couple was walking past on the sidewalk. The woman stopped mid-step and grabbed her husband's arm. "Frank!" Her voice went up an octave. "Frank, Ida's is open." They came in holding hands. The woman was already crying before she reached the counter. "We came every Sunday for 15 years, she said to nobody in particular. Every Sunday. Wren seated them at the table by the window. She brought them cornbread and butter without asking. The woman held her husband's hand across the tablecloth and didn't let go while she ate. By 11:30, 6 more people had come through the door. By noon, 14. Loretta ran food from the pass-through. Corinne plated in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled up and her lipstick already smudged from wiping her mouth with the back of her wrist. Eugene sat on his stool and greeted everyone by name. At 12:15, an old man at table 4 finished his pot roast, set down his fork, and closed his eyes. "That's Rose's pot roast," he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I'd know that anywhere." The dining room went quiet for a second. Not sad quiet. The other kind, the kind that happens when a room full of people all recognize the same thing at the same time and don't need to say it out loud. Then somebody laughed and somebody else asked Loretta for more sweet tea, and the noise came back. Wren stood behind the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder and flour on her forearm and watched her grandmother's restaurant fill up with people who had been waiting 3 years to come home. Around 1 o'clock, the front door opened and a girl came in alone. 16, maybe. Thin, a jacket too light for the weather. She stopped just inside the door with her hands in her pockets and her eyes moving across the room the way an animal checks a new space for exits. Wren knew that look. She had worn it walking into 7 foster homes. "You hungry?" Wren asked. The girl nodded once. "Sit anywhere you want." She chose the stool closest to the door. Wren set down a bowl of soup, a wedge of cornbread, a glass of sweet tea. She didn't hover. She didn't ask questions. She went back to the kitchen and let the girl eat. The girl ate slowly at first, then faster the way people eat when they're not sure where the next meal is coming from. Wren refilled the bowl without being asked. "What's your name?" "Nola." "Where you from?" "Ashboro. Staying with my cousin. She's not around much." Wren wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at the girl, the thin jacket, the careful eyes, the elbows on the counter of a restaurant she'd walked into because the door was open and the food smelled warm. "I could use some help around here," Wren said. "Dishes, sweeping. Can't pay much yet, but you'd eat." Nola looked up. Something moved behind her face, something she wasn't ready to name. "When?" "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, if you want." Nola nodded. She finished the soup. Wren wrapped half a loaf of cornbread in foil and pushed it across the counter as the girl stood up. "Take this for later." Nola took it. At the door, she stopped and looked back like she wanted to say something and didn't have the words for it yet. Then she left. Wren watched her through the front window until she turned the corner. Eugene, from his stool, said nothing. He didn't need to. By closing time, 43 people had come through the door. Loretta washed the last of the glasses. Corinne wiped down the tables slowly, taking her time with each one. Eugene sat on his stool with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and didn't seem to notice. When the others had gone, Eugene stayed. He looked at the empty room, then at Wren. "Ida kept this place standing for 17 years. Folks said she was foolish. Investigators told her to stop. Court said there was nothing to find. She kept the lights on anyway." He set his cup down. "You're never too late if the light's still on. Ida kept that light on for 18 years. Then he went home. 3 months later, Ida's kitchen was open 5 days a week. 8 items on the menu, all roses. The black-eyed pea soup sold out most days. People drove from 2 towns over for the peach cobbler. Wren slept in the small room behind the office. A real bed instead of a cot. A dresser Eugene had built from scrap wood one Tuesday afternoon. The garbage bag was gone. Eugene came in at 7:30 every morning. 3rd stool from the left. Coffee. Newspaper. Nola came after school and stayed until closing, doing her homework at the corner table when the dishes were done. Corinne drove down on Saturdays. She didn't ask to be forgiven. Wren didn't offer. But she set a plate for her every week, and Corinne came, and that was its own kind of answer. One Tuesday evening in June, Wren sat at Ida's desk and wrote a letter. "Dear Ida, my name is Wren. I'm your granddaughter. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. The door was open, just like you said. The recipes are in the binder. The photographs are on the walls. Eugene sits at the counter every morning. The town remembers you. I miss you too, even though we never met. I miss you because you left yourself in every corner of this place. You looked for me for 14 years. I'm here now. I came home." She folded the letter and placed it in the filing cabinet next to Ida's journal, next to 14 years of investigator reports and unanswered letters. One more piece of paper. But this one was an answer. The empty wall wasn't empty anymore. Eugene had taken a picture of Wren on opening day, standing behind the counter, a dish towel on her shoulder, flour on her forearm. He'd had it framed. It hung in the center of the wall that had been waiting 18 years. The first photograph in a space that would fill up slowly. Wren locked the front door from the inside. Same lock, same brass key. In the small room behind the office, she set the key on the windowsill next to the jade pendant. 2 small objects, one from each side of a family. One from a mother she couldn't remember. One from a grandmother she never met. Both given to her by women who had loved her before she knew she was loved. She turned off the light. The restaurant settled into its quiet. The door was locked, but not closed. It would never really be closed again. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if that letter had come for you? I'll see you in the next story. This story, Wren, Rose, Ida Griffin, and Corinne, is a work of fiction created purely for entertainment and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or real events is coincidental. But even fiction can hold a piece of truth, because somewhere out there, someone watching this right now grew up believing they were unwanted, when the truth was simply that no one ever told them otherwise. If this story reminded you of your own life, you're not alone. And it's never too late to open a door you thought was closed for good. If you're in a moment where you feel like nobody's looking for you, please don't carry that alone. Reach out to someone you trust or a local support line, because you deserve to be found too.